Okay, it looks like we're live. I already saw Christian. Sounds like you're going to tell me if I'm looking and sounding right on here, so I'll be looking at that. I'm going to have the chat up in front of me today. Glad everything's working. As you have discovered, things are a little bit more difficult out here in this rural environment, trying to get a decent internet connection to work and have that always ready. In fact, it was quite a difficult process to even to get the internet speeds to be able to do this, but that's a story for another day. See, we got quick strides up here in the chat as well. So again, thank you for being here. And today I'm gonna kind of just dispense with any pleasantries here at the beginning and just dive right into it. At the end of the video, I'm gonna kind of, once I'm done with the main presentation, I'll take a little more time to kind of, take a look at the chat a little bit more with you, kind of have a little more interaction. So just know if you want to stick around to the end, we can kind of be done with the presentation and have a little bit more of some feedback and some actual kind of back and forth with any of you that are watching this live. All right, so here we go. I am not the kind of person that usually makes a video with a title like this. I'm usually the kind of person who makes fun of people who make videos with titles like this because there's something inherently wrong about them. In a lot of ways, a video title like this is no different than someone on Instagram trying to get people to pay attention to them by taking pictures of their butt or their beautiful home, which they've arranged in just such a way for the shot. Or lately, with TikTok, coming up with some 10-second little dance clip to just get people to focus on you. Usually all building up to some sort of call out for some product or merchandise or some promo code to try out something or some ebook course that's been developed. So perhaps having lured you in on those kinds of premises of a kind of look at me, look what I've done, I'm going to make it clear right here at the beginning that I'm very aware of the questionable nature of proceeding in that way, but also aware of that's how our kind of attention economy runs this day. But I just want to make clear that this is not going to be one of those types of videos. I'm not going to give you, if I wanted it to be like that, I would have, this presentation would be me giving you the top 5 tips of how you can retire by 35. But stick around, because you got the bonus tip at the end. We're not going to do that. On the other hand, I really did retire at age 35. I really did travel the world with my 8 kids and buy a beautiful homestead. And inevitably, when anyone finds out that I did those things, the question that always follows is how? So I don't pretend that any of these things is something incredible or some great achievement, yet my sense from a lot of the people that I talk to is that many other people would like one or all of these things. And we've talked to a great number of people who, would love, of course, to retire early. Talked to a great number of people who would love to have more kids and just don't see the way to do it. Although that having kids aspect will probably be not as addressed as much in this video. That's something we can hit in another video. And of course, a lot of people would love to just go out and travel for an entire year. So I've given a lot of thought to what kind of video, and I guess I should say a lot of people would love to buy some beautiful property or farmstead or homestead in a beautiful location and be able to do that as well. So having realized that all these things are things that a lot of people would find desirable, I've given a lot of thought to what kind of video I could make that would be of genuine, authentic value to people. And not in that usual sensational social media fashion. I don't want to make the most entertaining video today, although I'll try to be as engaging as I can. But instead, I want to try to give you something deeper, actually plumb the depths of the experience that I had and try to pull out something that qualifies as wisdom. Always, there's no guarantees that that's going to be the case, but that is my aim today. And I think the best approach to this is simply to tell the story as I remember it. of course, our memories, I have learned lately, are not built to just capture, the facts of history. You would think they would be that, but if you pay attention to what our memories do is capture relevance from the past. And over time, our memories change because different things become relevant to us. So we forget some things, and other things actually form and come into our memories over time. So this is the best I can do, is think back and say, from who I am today, what are the memories I have from the experience that helped me achieve these things? And through that course, I'm going to try to share with you what I think are the principles. We're going to get into the specifics as well, because a lot of you, the last chat that we were here, a lot of you wanted to, we're kind of making wagers and whatnot of what was it, how did actually get the means, because of course a lot of this seems to boil down to just how did you get the money, right? And what I'm going to try to address is that the specifics on the money issue is actually, it's interesting and it's part of the story, but it's the least, or one of the least important parts of the story. And by far more important are the principles that I learned along the way that made this happen. And that's of much more greater value to you, because there's a lot of specific paths that not everybody can follow as far as how to make money, or if they have the skills to make money that certain way. But these principles that I share are ones that I hope will apply or be capable of applying across a much broader audience. They're things that you can take and ultimately cultivate the future that you want to have. At moments in the live stream today, I'm going to kind of stop and maybe take a look at the chat more than I have in the past. So feel free to give some comments, even put in some questions or things like that. And at certain points, I'll try to kind of take a little break, let us all kind of collect our thoughts, and I'll take a look at that and see if there's been any activity on there. So just know that I'll do that, like I'm doing that right now. But absent anything else to address right now, let's get into this actual story. And in order to get into the story, I have a little bit of a pre-story that kind of lays the groundwork of how I've come to see the world in one important sense. And I've already talked about this in other times, but one of the important ways that I see how reality lays itself out in front of us is as a series of games. And so you can imagine land games, and each game is shaped something like a mountain. And the reason games are shaped like a mountain is because almost every game has winners in the game, right? And there's usually only a few winners or one winner of the game, and then everybody else trying to play the game. And in the course of the game, each of these games is like a mountain that everyone's trying to ascend in the game. And ultimately, only a small subset get to the top of that mountain and get to be part of that elite group and enjoy the best rewards of that game, the best views all around them that comes from that game. And I've always been pretty good at a lot of the games that are presented to us in life. So again, if you can imagine this landscape of games, there's all sorts of games going on around us all the time, all sorts of areas in which we feel like we need to achieve, or people are telling us we need to achieve. Whether it's education, education is a game. What's the objective? You need to get good grades, hopefully learn something, and if you're really good at it, you get to go get more education. And you keep on doing it, and the ones that are best get to be in that education game forever. They're the scholars, right? Of course, most of our jobs lay themselves out as games. But there's a lot of other games going on around us all the time. And again, I've always been pretty good at a lot of the games. That's just how I was born. I've found myself that I'm pretty good at a lot of the games, but master of none of them in particular, or a few of them, I guess you could say. And just like any of you, I was always trying to find the one worth being at the top of. And eventually you start to realize that all these games, or most of them, have some fundamental flaws. Maybe you do start achieving in the game, and as you start getting up to those upper echelons and enjoying the rewards, you start to ask some questions like, is this it? Is this really all that this game had to offer, that I put in all this effort in order to get up to this point in? For example, sports can kind of be like that as youth. if you're participating in youth sports, it can seem all so consuming to achieve and get good at that game. And even if you get really good, you come to realize, is this it? With the rewards that come from being good at youth sports. Of course, there's this tiny subset that make it into this whole other world of sports and this whole other game. And of course, those people get to enjoy the rewards if they get to be professional athletes. But even then, if you get into that, if you're the creme de la creme of youth sports and you break into professional athletes, then even there's only a few, Messis and Ronaldos and things that are at the top, and everybody else is kind of just a bit player lower down at the bottom, and they have to work very hard to achieve it. So hopefully these examples show you how kind of these game spaces evolve. So anyway, you get to the top, hopefully, of some of these games. Hopefully all of us have at least some games we achieve, and you start realizing maybe this game wasn't all you thought it was cracked up to be. And maybe the fundamental game that I think is the most like this is the primary game that we are told, all of us in our society today are told we need to play. And that is this game of school, career, and retirement. If you think about it, so many institutions and social pressures tell us that this is the basic thing we need to do in life. You need to go to school. You need to do well at school. Why are you doing all this? The inevitable answer is almost always so that you can get a decent job and take care of yourself. Why do you have a decent job, take care of yourself? Well, so that you can be saving up and having a decent life, buying the things you need to buy, taking care of yourself. But hopefully, if you do really good, you get to have some more pleasures and amusements and toys along the way than other people. And then you need to be saving up because the game is all about retiring someday, where you can, backing up in this job point, you're working most of the time, of course, in this, giving almost all your energy to it. Why? Again, so you can have so you can consume, so you can have amusement, so you can have pleasures in life, and then ultimately someday you can retire when you're old in the future and have security for the rest of your life. And if you really think about it, this game of school, career, retirement is the primary game almost everybody's playing in life. It's the thing that we give the most time to in life. Almost everybody gives the most time to. You wake up every day and most of your day is tied up in this basic game. Whether you're in school, whether you're in a job, and then those that are retired, of course, get a bit more freedom, but you're 65 or older by the time you get to that. And we'll get to why that may be kind of a fundamentally flawed conception. And so as you play this game, especially if you're doing well in it, you do what you're supposed to as a child. You get good grades, you get a decent job, and then you get into that job and you realize, wow, is this all that that I put in this 12 years or 14 years of schooling for, was to come to this job and start working every day in things that I don't particularly like? And yeah, there's some money involved, but it's taking almost every waking hour of my day. And retirement seems nice, but that's decades in the future. And so you can start asking, is this really what this was all about? And you say, was this really supposed to serve me? Is this game really operating in my best interest? And when you start thinking about it, you realize, maybe this game was set up and we've all been told we need to play it, but the way that it's set up, is it really in our best interest, the players of the game or the bulk of the players? Or perhaps is there somebody else that is gaining the greatest rewards off of this game? And of course, I like to suggest that there is. I mean, when it comes down to it, as you play this game, you start to realize you're doing everything in the service of something else, something higher that you've been told exists and that you must serve. And one way of describing that would be the economy. It's the economy that you must serve. The economy must go well. We must continue to grow. We must continue to make this money in order to consume, or else if it doesn't, everything's going to fall apart. And you realize that this economy is operating an awful lot like a god. Every day you are in service to this god. And so you could call it the economy. I like to call it other names. One would be Babylon. If you look in the Holy Scriptures and different sacred texts, there's oftentimes names something like Babylon for this conception of oftentimes personified into a god, into a beast or something that everybody is caught up in serving. This good blog called Slate Star Codex that was being written in as of late, it's changed its name, but anyway, it had this great article where it called this great kind of god that everybody's serving, it called it Moloch, and it, for reasons, kind of ties it to a mythological figure in the past, but just made the case that in many ways, yeah, we are serving the interests of this great god through playing this game. And yeah, perhaps the rewards of this game don't come to us, the players. They're actually serving this god. And so you should start asking, okay, I'm serving a god, and it does seem to be a higher god here, but is there a better god I could be serving? Might there be a different kind of setup that I could engage in, a different pattern of worship, you could say, that would not only serve this God, but also in a sort of an agreement, serve my best interest as well. Okay? Just to belabor this point, you'll notice something curious if you think back to the American terrorist attacks on September 11th. And you'll have to ask yourself, why didn't the terrorists attack a Christian church as a part of that process? And I think the answer is that they were trying to strike at the United States, at its center, at its core, at what it cared about most deeply, and it worshipped. And those two towers, of course, that it brought down were monuments built to the American God. And it wasn't the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that those towers were built to, right? They were built to honor Babylon, to honor Moloch, to honor the economy. And those terrorists, they knew that, which is why they knocked them down, and why so many people, when that happened, had this feeling that the world had ended. Because, of course, that was the center of the world. And you knock down the center of the world, and suddenly people feel displaced as if their whole framework has come down. So I kind of think back, because I've actually been to the top of those towers. New York City, which is kind of the center place, you could say, of this kind of Babylon god. It's central holy city, you could say, and those towers were in many ways its primary monument to this god, and that's why they were targeted. So now that we've kind of identified that perhaps this game, which more honors this other god, is not the game that might be in our best interest, then if you agree with that, if you think that's a possibility, then you have to ask yourself, well, what would be better? What would be a better game? And that's more than anything else, perhaps what I want you to gain from this video, to kind of look at your own lives and break down the framework that you're told you have to operate in, and then ask yourself, what would be the ideal then? Is there, as you look at all this game space, all these games happening simultaneously, and all the way people are always trying to clamor and get to the top of all of them, because most of them are of what a thinker on YouTube, Jordan Hall, has called a rivalrous nature, which means that the more that some people succeed in them, the more this little minority of people that get to the top, the more they succeed, the less other people can succeed. So they're of a rivalrous nature. If they get some, you get less. Could there be some game that kind of is above and beyond all these other games, that is a meta game, you could say, that takes the traits needed to succeed in a lot of these games and brings them into a higher game? And if there is this higher game, it would be awfully nice if it was of such a nature that everyone could play it simultaneously and still reap the greater rewards of the game. If you notice in society right now, that's one of the major concerns, that all the games that we're playing benefit very few people, and they get most of the rewards. And so we're trying to figure out what would be a different game that we could all be playing. What is the nature of this metagame? And wouldn't it be awfully nice if all people could play it simultaneously and reap the greatest rewards of it, and not have it diminish the rewards of others? So if this game was of a non-rivalrous nature. Okay, so that is kind of the groundwork for now diving into the story. That's kind of the pre-story, because hopefully by laying out that framework, you can better make sense of the story and why I see things playing out in the way that they did. I'm going to take a little bit of a look here at the chat, just make sure I'm kind of caught up on things that you are commenting on. Again, thank you, Quick Strides, Christian Nemo, for offering your thoughts. Okay, so I like that. He's going to try to make us communist. So, and that's a thing, you know, that's one of those questions. What is the answer? Is it individualistic? Is it communitarian? You know, are we best is it best to understand ourselves in this life as being part of a greater collective, or is it best to understand ourselves as individuals? And given the efforts in which society battles over this question and has decent arguments both ways, I mean, my approach is always to not put it in an either or kind of thing, but put an and between the two. Is it the case that the fundamental nature of ourselves is individualistic? Sorry, I think I was bumping my microphone. And is it the case that we're also part of a greater collective? Can both of those things be true at the same time? And so that leads to the nature of a metagame would have to kind of further our development as individuals at the same time that it furthered a collective. And so that's the way I think. I'm always, if I see big camps between different ideas, I try not to see them as rivalrous ideas, but what's the way they could be combined? So thanks for bringing that up, Christian. Okay, so let's jump into the actual story. My earliest memory, the relevant memory to the story of how this all came about, goes back to 6th grade. And that is when one day my soccer coach, Leland Sycamore, so association football for those outside of the United States, of course, showed up at our class. And I was like, hey, it's Coach, you know, hey, Coach Sycamore, I'm over here. Well, what's he doing here? And it turned out he was the dad of one of my friends, Tyler, and he was there to teach us about what he did for a living. And what he did for a living was that he was an entrepreneur. He had started a bread business called Granny Sycamore's Bread and had grown it to be quite a formidable business. And that day is burned into my memory for the reason that it was the first time that I'd ever heard that word, entrepreneur. And it was the first time I can remember realizing, having an aha moment where I realized, why is it the case that nobody in school or anybody else has ever told me that this was possible? Like it floored me, because I was told, you know, he was presenting that you could start something like a business or a venture or something like that. You could create it out of thin air. And nobody had ever told me that before. And to realize that that was a possibility, there was something so exciting about it that I, you know, looking at my peers, just kind of like, did you know you could do this? And of course, not as many people as were excited about it as I was. But it was one of those moments where I realized that perhaps the people around me in this kind of main institution or game that I was in, which at the time was a game of education, maybe they aren't telling me everything that could be going on. You know, maybe there's possibilities out there in the world that aren't being presented to me. And so that was very important, because from then on, I was always suspicious, just as kind of you could probably sense from my kind of pre-presentation. I was always suspicious that what I was being told had to be the case, or this was the natural course of life, maybe didn't have to be the natural course of life. So that was a crucial moment, because from then on, I was always willing to question whether what I was being told in the course of life that I was going down was actually the best course of life. And so if you want to that's one of the first principles. If you want to go down this path of doing something different, like retiring at 35, well, you have to break out of the notion that everybody's telling you you can't do that, or that that's not a possibility. From there, I actually had to play the game, and this is an important principle. I had to actually play the game, the main game, this game of education and work that everybody else was playing. And in some sense, oftentimes you have to engage in that game in order to understand it enough that maybe you can transcend it. And so I very much did engage in the game. I worked hard in school, always had a decent proclivity for learning and did well that way, but I also started into jobs as early as elementary school. So the first job I had was as a paper boy, and it was the worst job ever. Perfect for my development because it showed me exactly what I didn't want to do for the rest of my life. I was delivering a paper that nobody wanted because it was one of these free papers that was sustained completely by ad revenue. Nobody subscribed to it. And so I was taking out something that almost nobody wanted, and they made me tie it to people's door, put a rubber band around people's door for that reason, so that it would reach people instead of throwing it on their driveway since they didn't want it anyway. And so there I am as a kid. I would go around on rollerblades. Oftentimes being Utah, it would snow. There would be slushy snow. I'm out there on my rollerblades delivering a paper that nobody wanted, and it was the worst. But it's one of the formative experiences that told me this is not the game I want to play for the rest of my life. The next job was the best job I ever had. So after a certain point, you're going to see that I tried to stop working jobs. But as far as a job, this one was the best one I ever had. And it was at a space center, it was called. People refer to it as the Space Center. It's called the Christa Mcauliffe Space Center. It was near to my house. And what it was this place where this very creative man, an elementary school teacher, so it was housed at an elementary school, had come up with an idea of how to educate children. And what he did was create a simulator. And in it, he had a bunch of computers. He got a grant from Apple that gave him all his initial money. And so he built a space simulator out of this where like each kid would sit down at a computer, they'd be inside of a spaceship, everything would be designed that way. And it was set in the Star Trek universe. And so basically you would bring classrooms of kids in, or if it was after school, people could sign up to come and do a mission here. And these kids would be able to either for a couple of hours or even overnight, do an overnight mission. They would get to basically live through a drama set in a sci-fi world in Star Trek. So literally you'd be able to be there on the bridge, sitting down like you would be, the weapons. One kid would be the weapons and the engines, another kid would be like communications and whatnot. And when I went there the first time, I mean, this place was the best place I had ever been to, because especially there in 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, you still have that ability to enter into a drama like that, and it becomes real to you. And so imagine being able to go, I love Star Trek, and being able to live through a drama like that. It was fantastic. And then I learned that there was an opportunity to work there. So I worked there, and I got to do that as a job, take part in this creative enterprise. And the reason I spend so much time on this is to show you all this came about because of, a creative individual who was willing to think outside of the basic structures and create something that nobody had thought before. And it was wonderful, and I got to be part of it. And it showed me that work in life could be more like this and a lot less like my paper boy job. So those were two important ones. Now I'm going to go quicker through the rest of them. After that one, I worked in my neighborhood pool as a certified pool and spa operator, which is the first time, and this was all early high school, this is the first time I was able to have autonomy and responsibility in a work environment. I got a job at a kind of fast food place, and I think it'd be good for everybody to work in a fast food place or a restaurant growing up just to see what really goes on behind the scenes in those kind of settings. I worked setting up a fireworks show that took place in my city called Stadium of Fire, just a straight out labor job, and taught me how brutal labor could be. But on the other hand, it was with some fun friends, and we had a great boss. There was a man that was half bonkers, I guess you could say, but he was so much fun. We called him Mad Mardigan from the movie Willow. And it just taught me that even horrible work could be great with the right kind of people. So I had that. Eventually I went and did 2 years as a religious service missionary in the country of Uruguay, which was a whole different kind of work, a grueling sort of work of lots of rejection, but also a work where you got to fundamentally influence people's lives for the better, which has shaped the way that I view work, that work could be something that tangibly improved people's lives for the better. Got back home and started working as a bank teller for a large corporate bank for Wells Fargo. That taught me that I never wanted to have a corporate job. That was not the first one, but the first major job where I was working for the man, you could say, and realizing that I was in this setting where even if I saw things that could be improved or bettered, the man didn't want to hear about it. I was just down there at the bottom of the totem pole, and it was not an environment where you were being asked to think differently or try to improve things. You were just supposed to do what you were told, etc. And so I very quickly learned that that was not the setting I ever wanted to live in, because I didn't have enough autonomy and control over my circumstances. So I, in very significant ways, played the game, played this game of working a job in the ways that most people do every day. And so I just wanted to throw that in because each one of those experiences taught me something important, which ultimately allowed me to hope to transcend the game in a way. And that's an important thing because a lot of people want to kind of jump that step. They might recognize that the game is bad to begin with, but then they don't fully understand it enough in order to transcend it. They think they can skip that step of understanding the game. And the best way to understand any game is you have to engage in it. You have to play it. And so it was these experiences playing it that made me realize some points of how ultimately someday I could get out of it. At the time, after doing those jobs, I wouldn't have been able to articulate any of that, but these are the kind of things that brewed in my mind over time. So the next part of the game, the next part of the development of the story, I guess you could say, was my education, because simultaneously, along as I was working these jobs, was the education that I was getting at the same time. Because, as we know, in this main game that society is telling us to play, education is crucial. And so, like I said, in elementary school, high school, I was able to do fairly well, enough that I was able to, if you do well, you get to do more education. So I went to undergrad, or college, university, as it goes by different names, and I studied philosophy and business. And the philosophy degree was very useful in helping me learn how to think, and it has definitely borne fruit in my life. But the business degree, funny enough, was mostly worthless, except for this class that it had me do, which was called an Entrepreneurial lecture series. And all it was is they brought in successful entrepreneurs, people that had actually done it, who got to come in and tell their story. So it's very much like what I'm doing right now. Somebody who's actually done it and is now kind of thinking back upon the principles that allowed them to do what they did. And one day, most of them were fairly boring, actually, but one day this one guy came in. His name was Mitch, and I can't even remember his last name. But he had this principle that just kind of seared itself into me the minute I heard it. And he said that if you want to achieve anything like I've achieved, he said, you have to live life like most people won't in order to live the rest of your life like most people can't. So that bears repeating. Live life like most people won't in order to live the rest of your life like most people can't. And something about that, when he said that, was just, it just expanded my mind, because I realized, in a sense, I already knew that, but I'd never had it articulated so clearly. And that simple principle guided me from that point on. You can see how it was related back to that insight when I was a sixth grader, but I wouldn't have been able to articulate that as a sixth grader. But you have to be able to break out of the ways everybody else is doing things, because if you do things the way that everybody else does them, you'll end up like everybody else. You have to be able to break out of the way that everybody does things if you want to be able to achieve different things than everybody else achieves. And so in this landscape of games that I've laid out, when you get higher up on some of these mountains, you realize that there are better and higher games out there, but to get to them, you notice something in the landscape. If you're on these mountains, if you see that there's a better mountain, there's a better game, hopefully again the meta game, the biggest mountain out there. Well, if you're up high on a game, you actually have to descend that mountain in a sense in order to get climbing the higher one. So notice that's the principle right there. You have to be willing to do what most people would not do, which is lower your status sometimes or your well-being. You have to do things that most people won't do. You have to sacrifice in a sense, right? You forego something good in the short term, and you lower down a mountain that turned out to not be a good mountain in order to go down into the lower valleys and be in a low state again, and then you start climbing that bigger mountain that you did, which ultimately will take you higher than all the other mountains. But you have to go through that process. It seems built into the structure of the world. It just is like that. And of course, I'd love to be able to tell you why, but that would, I wish I knew that. I have to think about that more. But it seems like that principle, sacrifice, is built into the structure of the world, which is why humanity has been trying to figure out that principle by embodying it. Think how like every culture has for the last several thousand years has incorporated this principle of sacrifice. They had to live it out by sacrificing real things, humans, oftentimes in many of them, then animals, plants, etc. And then finally they learned how to abstract that pattern and start sacrificing things like time and energy in the way that we do when we do anything of lasting import, like getting an education or whatnot. So, as you can tell, that principle was foundational for everything that came after that. At the same time, in that same entrepreneurial lecture series, I came upon the first really valuable book that I'm going to share with you because I think it can benefit you just in the same way I did. So, as part of that entrepreneurial lecture series, they required us to read this book, The E-Myth Revisited. And the essential part of this book is that it taught you that if you're going to start a business or do some venture where you are the principal actor, you are the creator, there's a kind of natural trap, I guess you could say, that you can fall into when you're doing that. And that's that you build yourself essentially a prison. So you try to create this new world, a new business, something else that will give you freedom. But in fact, you create it in such a way that the whole thing depends on you to operate. And that means that you are then stuck in it forever. If you ever pull yourself out, then it all crumbles because it was built around you. And so that taught me that if you want to build something lasting that can create resources for you, that can operate without you, you can't build it around your personality and your specific talents and things, your individuality. Because otherwise, nobody else will ever be able to do it, and you'll be trapped in it. It will just be a really demanding job that you created for yourself for the rest of your life, which, of course, will never let you retire and have the freedom that you claim to want. So that was a very important principle that, again, I set aside for the moment because I'd still never started a business or done anything to that point. I was still in this learning process in the regular game of life and hadn't broken out of it yet, but it would prove to be crucial later. Last thing in my undergrad education that was foundationally important was I had this professor who taught accounting. And again, the accounting didn't turn out to be that useful, but his life, his story proved to be very useful. His name is Norm Nimro. And he was a man who had retired by the time he was 40. So first of all, it showed me that it could be done. And he did it through, kind of a very non-sexy, kind of traditional business way. So it showed me that you didn't have to create Facebook in order to, or some novel new thing in order to retire early. And then also the way that he did it was that he positioned himself to just live a modest life, I guess you could say, a comfortable life, but a modest life. And so he built up the processes and the resources that would sustain him perpetually, but not, on a yacht per se, but just living a decent life. And in the end, what he wanted to do for the rest of his life was be a university professor. He didn't have a PhD, and so he basically worked for free for a university for the rest of his life in order to pull that off. So that taught me that you don't have to do it in this way that so many, especially I think guys, think that retiring early means, which is, you slave away and you have to create this novel, tech company, and then sell it all, and then live a life, on a yacht, surrounded by scantily clad women for the rest of your life. Some do that, I guess. Some have achieved that, but it's very few. And for the rest of us, maybe it'd be better to look at a retired life like that as something a little bit different, something a little bit more modest. So I wrapped up undergrad. I didn't go immediately into trying to make money because I already knew that that wasn't the highest value of life. I'd figured that out as much that was this game, again, this societal game that we're being told to play tries to teach you that money is like the most important thing. That's one thing I didn't bring up earlier. Like that's one of the primary values of Babylon or Moloch or whatever you want to call this game, is that money is everything. It's something to fear. It's something to worship. It's something to that controls you. And I already knew at that point that that wasn't the case. Money was a tool, and we'll get into that in just a sec. But that also taught me that it wasn't crucial to jump right out and start a company or something like that at this point. There are other valuable forms of capital, you could say, than money. And one of those is the ability to think. And so what I most wanted after undergrad, and had that philosophy degree that had taught me a lot on how to think, I wanted to learn how to think in a different way. And that led me to going to law school, where law school itself does not teach you how to be a lawyer. It teaches you how to think in a particular way, at least here in the United States. And so that was appealing to me, and that's the path I went because I wanted that ability, and it paid off in that way. So I was able, again, because I do decently, usually in an academic setting, I was able to get into Harvard Law and go there. And the funny thing about that education at Harvard Law, it got me what I wanted, which was that ability to think. But really, when anybody thinks about Harvard Law, I think a few years ago I read an article that Harvard Law, like the main benefit, the whole reason is that 10 years out of school, going to Harvard Law has the highest median income, or those graduates of Harvard Law have the highest median income of any degree that's available out there. At least that's what I read in an article a few years ago. So that would be the primary motivation to go, is that if you go there, you can get one of these jobs in a big law firm that 10 years out will put you at least in a median way above, better in a better place than any other place. You can have that sort of guarantee. So that was the funny thing about Harvard Law, is the way that happens is that in your second year of law school, there's this week called Interview Week. And basically all you have to do is show up in a suit and have some resumes, and you go to about 20 interviews, kind of targeting a city that you want to live in. And the basic kind of transaction or agreement of going to Harvard Law is that you will get a job if you do that. And so they're at school, again, bringing up this principle of being willing to live like most people won't. On that week, where everybody else, except for a few other crazy people like me, showed up at school, again, dressed to the nines, nice suits, these leather, kind of folders with their neat resumes on fine paper and ready to go through interview week, I showed up at school in my shorts and my t-shirt because I knew that that's not what I wanted. And I have to admit, I didn't have that kind of ultimate confidence at the time. As I got there to school and realized, look at everybody else doing that, you get those doubts. I mean, I already had a wife, I had 2 kids at that point, and so you're wondering, like, am I making the right decision here? And yeah, I had to wrestle with that at the time, but ultimately decided, nope, I know I do not want to work in one of those kinds of settings. How did I know that? Because of those jobs I'd done before, working for the man. I didn't want to have to do that. So that was a crucial moment. Had I gone down that path, very soon maybe I would have developed what is referred to as the golden handcuffs, where you get into that path, making a lot of money, but also having to work extremely hard to make that money. And very soon you start living the life with the car and the private education for your kids and the house and the mortgage payments and all those things, such that you can never exit that prison, despite the fact that you have a lot of money. So that was a crucial moment of being willing to finally live. That was the first time I really lived that principle that I had seen before in kind of the most explicit way possible, of not just going down the path that other people did. At the same time, in Harvard Law, I tried to kind of educate myself in different ways. And so, funny enough, maybe the most important thing I learned while there at school was from not a law book and not from that legal education, but I came upon this book right here, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And what's funny is that, I'm a person, I love real heady books, philosophical books. Oftentimes they're very difficult. I love wading through that kind of material. But these books that I'm showing you today are more kind of made for mass consumption. They're kind of made to be entertaining. But if you look at them in the right way, if you look at this like a philosophy book and try to pull out what are the underlying principles, there's actually another one of these core foundational principles in this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. The basic idea of it is that you don't have to work a job for the rest of your life. I mean, I already knew you could be an entrepreneur, but he gives you a different definition of the idea of an asset, right? And he says that an asset is something that produces for you even when you don't put any work or inputs into it anymore, okay? And the reason that's important is because you start realizing that the way that you produce things in the world doesn't have to be through extraction, what I'm going to refer to as extraction. And extraction would be the way that kind of our economy is built on today. If you look at our economy, everything ultimately comes from this energy source based in petroleum. And ultimately it's limited, of course, but we still have a lot of it. And so what we have to do is extract that resource, and then we turn it into all sorts of different forms of energy that we can use to produce things. But eventually it will run out. It's non-renewable. So in this book, you learn that doesn't have to be the way that you do things. That's a regular job, right? You have to go and kind of extract the money from your corporation that you're working for by putting in just as much work every day in order to extract that money. Instead, there's another principle out there in the universe. Instead of extraction, which usually involves compulsion and force in a way, there is the principle of regeneration. There are processes out there in the world that occur over and over that are more of regenerative feedback loops that can, once you get them started, can continue to exist perpetually and recreate themselves without additional inputs into them. And again, that has been one of the principles that finally clicked in my mind that literally changed my life, because it made me realize that if you could set up these types of regenerative loops and put in that work into them, because they all take work to get started for a time like most people won't, then once those loops are started, you will benefit in ways that most people, again, can't even fathom in their minds because they're so stuck in the other way. And so, again, this simple kind of mass consumption book that's just kind of entertaining and whatnot really has this principle down below it that if you can extract that principle from it, can change your life. So that was law school. Those are the most important moments in law school. So finally here, we're about 50 minutes into this. Finally, we get to the actual, what did I do to actually make the money? And so you can see the way that I think about things. Very easily, this video could have been just about this part. But to me, that would be very unuseful or so much less useful than giving you these foundational things. So I should have warned you at the beginning, yeah, this is a long story, but this is the only way I know of how to actually tell you what happened here. I'm going to take a little bit of a look at the chat once again, just kind of see anything that any ideas people have had. Again, thanks Christian for throwing in thoughts there. All right, some questions about the mission and how that works, which maybe I'll talk about at the end. So I'm going to jump back into the story. Finished undergrad, finished Harvard Law. Finally, I'm leaving, going out into the world. So what did I decide to actually do, since I didn't go down that path of working for a big law firm like most people do? Well, I decided I was going to try to start something. My original plan was actually to practice law for a while and something. I figured I should play that game for a little bit to learn what it had to teach me. But as I tried different things out, you do some internships and work in the summers and stuff, nothing felt right. In the end, finally I was like, I'm young, I have some space to make mistakes. I should jump into this game of trying to build these a regenerative resource, you could say. And so I knew I needed to jump in and create a company, but I didn't know what to do. And so there I was, 27, and finally jumping into the game of really trying to play a different game. Hopefully figure out this meta game, or at least try to play it and figure it out as I was trying to play it. And so one part of the timeline, it's important to know that I was 27 when I left Harvard Law. I, again, was married. I married Sarah back in undergrad. We had 3 children by the time we left law school. So I was 27 then, and then, as the title of this video says, by the time I was 35, I was retired. And so that's important because there in the space of, 8 years, was able to go from nothing, because I left school, with debt, a lot of debt, and was able by the time of 35 to then have enough resources to retire. And that's also very important because one of my main messages to you, if you have some interest in this, is that I think anybody who made a retirement like this their goal, but you actually have to be willing to make it your goal. Lots of people say they'd like to do this, but then you look at their life and they don't make this their main aim. So if you made this your goal and were willing to live for a while, like most people won't, my kind of belief is that nearly everybody could achieve this within a decade. And that's a long amount of time, but when you look at what most people have to do for retirement, when they're looking at 65 or 70 or something like that, a decade is not that long at all. And so mine worked out in 8 years, and a lot of that time wasn't even dedicated to making much money. So what is the course that I took? Well, I left, and my first idea for what to do was to do a cafe. And pretty much everybody thought I was crazy for that, and rightly so, because restaurants are generally not bad business models, but if you have no experience and don't know what you're doing, it is a tremendously bad bet statistically of having that go good. So I came back from school and was researching and kind of getting in the process of starting cafe, and I realized I was at least smart enough to know that that was not going to fly. And all sorts of people were giving me feedback of, you might want to rethink that. So I did. And so my next idea was I tried to start a local news source using a concept of citizen journalism where regular people would write the news pieces. And so I started a website, and it actually did pretty good as far as interest and participation and things like that. But 6 months into it, I couldn't make a business model work for it. And so I was there basically at that point, our money that I had borrowed for school, and I had borrowed some extra before we left, it was running out, and I was kind of basically ready to concede for a time and say, I'm going to have to work a law firm job of some sort, and I was looking at that option. At the same time, Sarah was just about to have our fourth child, Auden, and we had kind of a confluence of events where Sarah, who delivers quite quickly, we got stuck where we didn't move into action quick enough on the day that she started going into labor, and she actually had our child at our house. And I was able to catch the baby, and that's kind of one of the fondest memories of my life. And we called 911. The paramedics came over. We went to the hospital. But we're people that like to have babies in birthing centers anyway, and then bring them home. And so by the end of that day, we'd been able to leave the hospital and come back to our house. All our kids were away with our in-laws. And so we're there with this new baby that's just been born. We were not living in a very nice house. Again, my business that I had tried to do had basically failed, and we were running out of money. And so it kind of had one of those moments, right, where you're just sitting there staring at this new baby and just, feeling a bit overwhelmed as a man, I guess you could say, or somebody who's trying to be a man in those ways that we'll get back to on our manhood series. And funny enough, right then the phone rings, and basically what it was as part of our church, oftentimes, well, in our church, everything that's done pretty much in the church is done by lay people. You do it by volunteer basis. It's called a calling. And so that was an opportunity to work in a calling in kind of our local area. And I was supposed to show up the next day, and they were going to explain it to me and whatnot. So that was not consequential, except for the fact that the person that I started working with in that calling turned out to be somebody who would turn into a business partner. And so, whose name was Robert. And so we got working together. We found out that we were both in circumstances of we needed to start something new in life. He had experience in real estate. And so he was looking to start his own company doing property management. And again, we both had very little resources, but we both were full of energy, and we saw that we worked well together. And so we said, well, how about we start this company together? To me, it was a thing that just felt right at that moment. And so we dove into it and we did it. And it was such a funny confluence of events because I had never thought in my mind, oh, I want to get involved in working in anything to do with real estate. Maybe someday it'd be nice to own some properties or something like that. I never would have been interested in that. But this was the opportunity that presented itself to me. And this was a good person to work with. And that's what I knew, so I went for it. And the best part of this story is we started our little company, and within like 2 weeks, this recent Harvard Law School graduate here, we got a job that was fixing a roof on one of the properties that we were managing, and we didn't have enough guys, and so I was up there on the top of the roof, roofing, and just thinking to myself, once again, I hope this is the right thing, because here I am, back kind of doing a type of job that I didn't really want to have forever, and just having those kinds of doubts. But again, it's just part of the story. You have to live for a while like most people won't in order to live the rest of your life like most people can't. And so we did what we had to do to get that little company started. We worked out of his basement with his family, and basically started with nothing. I was living on credit cards at this point, since all the law school funds had evaporated. But we started little by little to have a trickle of money coming in. And so at first, based off of my whole life, what I was trying to do in that business was work as hard as I could, because that's what we're taught, right? In the main game of life, you gotta work hard, you gotta hustle, you gotta try to, you gotta bust your butt in order to make anything happen. And of course, there's a lot of truth to that. But I quickly realized that my desires to do that and make this succeed were clashing a little bit with my business partner, because sometimes he wanted to take off on a vacation, on holiday with his family, and we would clash a bit, because I'd say, look, I'm here working and you're going off to play. So we started trying to shift our thinking and say, okay, well, at least let's do this. If one of us isn't working, both of us won't work. And so we implemented that. And that was kind of our first principle of turning this into a different kind of business. But that in and of itself doesn't spell success. You could say, well, wouldn't that make your business not work? Fair enough. So the real crucial principle that then came as I was, again, trying to bust my butt, working as hard as I can, work Saturdays, everything. The principle that came in that once again reshaped my whole life and the whole way that I approach life came from yet another book. And that one, I've taken the dust jacket off it, but it is the 4-Hour Work Week by Timothy Ferriss. And again, another book that's kind of like this video with a title that's meant to suck people in and then kind of offer something different, some underlying principles that are a little bit different than just what the title's about. But this book blew my mind and reshaped the way that I approach the world, because it offered up this principle. It kind of combined very well with Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and said that maybe there's a way to, right from the get-go, start, as you're creating, as you're trying to cultivate a resource, whatever it is, a business or an investment or something like that, from the very beginning, the ideal should not be to work as hard as you can. The ideal should be to see if you can make it so you can work as little as you can. So it's, flip that concept. And again, that kind of broke my brain, and I realized, yeah, that's exactly what we should be trying to do. We need to be, our goal here should not be to work as much as we can. It should be to start working as little as we can. And so let me explain what I mean by that. Once I had that in my mind, and bringing back also that other book, the E-Myth Revisited, into this, once I realized, okay, we want to try to work as little as possible, and we've got to try to design this thing so that we don't have to be the ones doing the work. This whole business does not depend on us to work. And then again, throw in Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Could we combine those two principles and also still make this a resource that would perpetually generate capital, whatever it is that you want, whether it's food, it was money we wanted out of this one, but those were kind of the three packages of principles that I was trying to implement. And it turns out you can actually combine those all into one. And so here's what we did. We said, all right, right now we're busting our butt, we're working really hard, but the goal is not to work. And so let's kind of force ourselves down a path where we have to learn to work less. So we said, how about in a month's time, we stop working Fridays. Okay, so we start looking at what we would have to do in order to just stop working every Friday. And so given that we were the masters of that business, we started focusing on doing that and arranging things so that nothing crucial ever happened on Friday, putting the expectation with our clients and customers and whatnot that we would no longer be open Friday. And it worked. If we made that our goal, and in 1 month's time, lo and behold, we were able to eliminate Fridays. And so think about just how significant that is. In 1 month's time, I eliminated 20% of the amount that I was working. And again, in some bigger business, if I was working for the man, I would, never be able to do that. Maybe today in a tech company or something, the way that they are allowing people to work from home and stuff, you could pull it off. But anyway, for the time, that was groundbreaking for us. And right there, we eliminated 20% of our work. So once we realized we could do that, we said, okay, well, let's rethink this as well. How about, instead of just taking one day off every week, why don't we take a whole month off? Why don't we see if we could do that? And once again, you can't do it immediately. Everything would fall apart. We said, okay, let's set a goal. I think it was like 4 months in the future. Maybe it was even 6 months. We said, in 6 months' time or 4 months' time, whatever it was, let's take an entire month off. And so what would we need to do in order to pull that off? And we saw of course, we'd have to hire somebody. We'd have to be able to be making enough money. We'd have to have the income in order to be able to pay somebody to do at least the menial work in the space of a month and have everything survive and how to have everything fall apart. And so again, we made that the focus of what we were doing and built all our actions around that. And again, this is crucial because so many people that want these things, they say, yeah, I would love to not work a month from now, but then they don't actually work every day to make that happen. They just kind of go along the regular path of things and think, oh, maybe that will just kind of happen if I hope it will happen. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to make these very specific things your goals. You have to make, if you want to retire within 5 years, you have to craft every day around that goal and not the other game that we're told we have to play. Okay, so after 4 months, guess what? We were able to pull it off. We were able to take an entire month off. And we're just sitting there with our families. Of course, we take some vacations. And it was fantastic to do that for the first time. I mean, you just feel so fulfilled by knowing that you just pulled that off, because how many people do you know that can just do that? And I was talking to brother-in-laws and stuff that work for the man, for big companies, and like once every 5 or 6 years, their big corporation lets them take a sabbatical for a month with their family. And of course, all the rest of the time they need to slave away with the 50 to 80-hour work weeks in order to, once every 5 years, have their sabbatical. And here we were in 4 months, we'd pulled off a whole month being able to take off. And so it was awesome. And in that moment we said, okay, well, why don't we try to do this again? Why don't we try to do this again in 3 months? And so we did exactly the same thing and said, yeah, let's try to do this twice a year now. We're just twice a year, we take an entire month off of time. And so we did that, and we were able to pull that off. And it's funny because you'd even see people that would kind of become upset with us when they learned that we were doing this, because when people see you doing something else that's beneficial, there's kind of that sense of, hey, that's not fair. Like, you guys can't do that. You're not obeying the system. You're not playing by the rules that everybody else is supposed to. And yeah, it's kind of like we were giving Moloch or Babylon, we were giving it the bird and sticking it to the man, and it felt fantastic to do it. That's exactly the kind of stuff I love to do in life, as funny as that sounds. Okay, so that was one of the principles. Next, it's important to mention here is that a major way that we were able to do all this was by not needing a tremendous amount of money to live on when we weren't working. So instead of in that month that we weren't working, having to have an income of $10,000 a month, I think we were trying to make do with $4,000 a month at the time, and trying to live in a way that was possible. It was still comfortable. I mean, it was probably even more than that, but I'm just trying to give an example. We were trying to live at the bare level of comfort, which allows you then to do things like this, rather than thinking you have to be making these tremendous bucks, and then you never get to that, right? And so we were trying to, not have huge car payments, we were both living in modest size houses that completely fulfilled all the needs we had and our family had and whatnot, but were just not the McMansions and things like that everybody saw as the ideal that if we would have made our goal, we could have gotten into those pretty quickly, but then they would have been the prison that ruled the rest of our life. So that is important. And then next part of what we did that I think is an important part of this is that, well, what do you do with that free time that you then generate for yourself, whether it's on a Friday or otherwise. And so what we decided to do was to say we should then dedicate that free time we have to something inherently meaningful. Because what's the good of giving yourself all this freedom if you're just going to waste it on amusement, pleasure? You know, we could all use a little bit of that, but then when you start having that forever, you start realizing that your life is, again, you didn't achieve what you thought you were going to achieve because it's not inherently fulfilling. And so at a certain point, once we'd gotten pretty good at this, we started saying, well, how about we do this every day? Why don't we'll show up at a reasonable time, like 10 a.m. in the morning, and then we'll bust our butt and be done by 2 p.m. every day, which will force us to come in and get done the things that need to be done. But then our commitment is both before and after, we're going to do something meaningful. And so we jumped into those kind of things. For me, it was actually soccer. My kids were just coming to the age that they could play soccer, and we dove in tremendously into making that a part of our lives. And I was ultimately able to be the coach for the high school that I had been to. I ended up as the varsity coach and dedicated far more time to that than I was to my work for a number of years. And it taught me so much and gave me some of the most fulfilling experiences in my life. So that's another important part of this, is that if you don't have a vision for what you're going to do if you achieve retirement or free yourself up, you'll find yourself maybe having achieved some freedom and then wasting it away on what society generally tells you to spend your free time on, which is pleasure, amusement, etc. All right, another stopping point. I'm going to kind of glance at the chat, make sure I'm kind of caught up on what you guys have been brought up. I see that Wis Tsukaza, I hope I'm saying that right. Wis has been in on the chat as well. So good to see you both here, and thank you for showing up to so many of these. Yeah, Christian Nemo brings up, hey, I was the new coach Sycamore. In a lot of ways I was, because that's what he was doing. He had the time to do that because he had built it up, and so that's the way it works. Yeah, that's something good that I hadn't picked up on. Let me get into a little bit of the practicality of things so you know the specifics, because those are valuable too, by knowing exactly what our business was. So you'll see the kind of business that lends itself well to doing something like this. So when we started, we were doing just purely property management. And property management is essentially taking care of other people's real estate investments. We focused, especially in the beginning, primarily on residential real estate. So basically our main two duties were leasing the real estate, finding tenants for apartments and things like that, and then taking care of the buildings. So we made fees. We would charge a percentage of the income coming in from the rent that was paid by these tenants as our fees, and then we also created a maintenance business. So it was essentially kind of two businesses at once. A maintenance business that when things broke on these properties, we would send our own company out to fix them and charge an hourly rate that made us money on that. And the reason that's important is because this is the most unsexy business you could imagine. And again, one that I never saw myself getting into. But the thing about it is it's been around forever. I mean, this kind of business has probably been around for thousands of years, and it works. It's a tried and true business model. And so if you want to create this sort of retirement for yourself, property management is a decent kind of business. There's plenty of others, but it's a decent kind of business because it can be run through processes. And that was the main thing I would do in the business, is try to create the processes that would make it run, again, without us. And so I don't like property management. I never did. I probably never will, but it worked as a means to achieve what I wanted to in this. The other thing we did, though, is as soon as we realized that, hey, we can take care of other people's real estate investments. We know how to run these. We know what to rent the places for. We know how to make money with these real estate investments. Well, why don't we get into the game? We should be the ones owning the real estate investments, not these gray-haired old men that are all our clients. And so that was another crucial moment where we started thinking like most people don't think, because most people think, well, I've got to get all the money that I would need to then be able to make an investment, put a down payment on something like that. And so we started to say, well, what if we could have the best of all worlds? What if we could get into real estate investments and not use a single dollar of our own money? Is that possible? And it turned out when we made that our goal for a sustained period of time, like 6 months to a year, we were able to get into our first investment. So our first investment was the ugliest apartment building you could ever imagine. It was in a kind of bad part of town. It was full of drug users at the time, but we had been hired by a court. There was a court case running, and this property was in question, and we had been hired to take care of it while the court case went. And as the court case was developing, they put it up for sale, and we knew exactly what this property made in terms of income. We knew what it could make if it was bettered a little bit. And so we said, let's target this one to buy. This one's kind of a bargain. And so we didn't have a dollar of money that we could put in on it. So what we did with that investment is that we said, what are the resources we have? Well, we have relationships with these clients that we're taking care of their properties. In fact, since we're doing a good job, we have some trust built up. So why don't we ask one of them for a private loan in order to do this? And we can explain the numbers and why it will work. And we had to spend 6 months pitching people and receiving lots of rejection. But ultimately, one of our clients said, okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'll give you a private loan. It was for $217,000. So I'll give you that, but you've got to pay me 18% interest on it. And most people, especially with today's interest rates, would be like, that's absurd. We're not going to pay interest rates like that. But we did the math, and we're like, whoa, it actually works. We could do this private loan. He would give us a loan for the entire amount. We buy these 14 horrendous units, but the math will work. We can pay off the mortgage money and actually make money on the top of it. And so we jumped into an 18% loan, but for the entire amount. And so we got a property having not spent a single dollar of our own money, and it actually worked. We were able to do what we thought we did, and we were able to do it because we had experience in knowing what to do that. So this was the kind of place that so few people would ever buy, but we knew that there was the potential in it. So that's important for what it's worth. And from there, we went building a bigger portfolio. We went for a nicer apartment building, and once again used resources, having one of our clients partner with us on it. And the deal was he would pay the down payment on the loan needed to get this property, and we would manage it for free since we could already do that. So again, we got into our next one was 35 units, pretty nice place, not spending a single dollar of our own money. But this took probably about a year to make happen. So that's another one of these things that you have to realize these kinds of things come about by putting it as a goal and then sustainedly focusing on that until it happens. And so combine those two things, these real estate investments that we were able to have that our company was taking care of, and they generate money month to month. And then our property management business as itself, which I was working on creating processes by which other people could do the work and it would still generate enough money. Those are the specifics of how I was able to actually generate the money. So I give you that kind of section of this presentation so that you realize, so that you get both the principles, which I've spent the bulk of the time on, but also the specifics of how I actually did it. But having told you the specifics, I fully realize this is only one of many ways that people and many different kinds of businesses that people could create. So that's why I think the general principles are a lot more important than the specific way that I did it. But real estate is a tried and true way. It's never going to go away in order to achieve something like this. Okay, I'm going to take another look here real quick at the chat. Okay, so here's a good question again by Christian. He's asking what the demands of time were like during this time. So as I said, when we started out, I was spending a lot of time away from my family. But that's where we started saying, as we're doing this, as it turns out, I think you guys can imagine how this is, especially if you work jobs. If you pay attention to your job, anytime somebody's made to work a 40-hour work week, so much of that time is not spent actually working. And so as soon as we realized that we wanted to start working less, it made it so that we were forced to actually work in the time that we were working. So that's where, when we took out Fridays, for instance, that just meant that we spent more time actually working on the important things Monday through Thursday, and it started working. And then eventually, I told you we took months off, and then eventually we made our schedule. So even when we were working, it was only from like 10 to 2 every day. And so in that, when you are only working like 4 hours a day, that means you've got to jump in and you see what needs to be done and you do it, instead of playing around, on social media for half the day, since you don't need to actually be working every moment when you work a regular job. So that's something that was pretty valuable. And then most of that other time that we had freed up, we did start spending it with family, especially that's when I got into soccer. The one caveat I will say is that when I did the high school soccer, that totally took me away from my family. A lot of hours of every day. Like I said, I was working more on that than on any of this work. So that was an exception, but it was something our family went into knowing it'd be like that. And my kids participated where they could. They would show up in practices, they would come to the games, etc. But it was something that our family decided would be important. And after 3 years of being that head coach, I was exhausted from doing it. And so I jumped out of that. And that actually is a great segue to kind of the wrapping up portion of this, is that what has happened since. So I've given you kind of the principles and the particulars of how I was able to then generate these regenerative assets, I guess you could say, or cultivate these feedback loops that would then perpetually create income with much less work on my side. And you can see how it still required some work, but we were getting to the point where it was much less work. And we were even getting to the point that it became such that we only needed to maybe do a meeting a week with this business, because now we'd put in place employees, we had the processes that worked, and so we could just jump in once a week for about an hour and be able to manage these things that we put in. So, nothing's ever, or few things are ever perfect such that they'll just continue to generate forever without any inputs. And that's part of this. Usually you're going to have to at least keep an eye on these regenerative cycles that you've created. But all the same, one thing I realized right then was that my kids were growing up. They were my oldest kids were finishing elementary school, and that happened so quick. It's amazing how fast your kids will grow up. And I started thinking about it, and I'd had this thought in my mind for a number of years, but I realized this whole way that society expects you to do things is in the main game that we've been talking about, serve in Babylon, is completely reversed. If it was set up right, we should be working real hard when we're just starting to have kids, because when they're young, of course, it matters that you give them some attention, but they actually don't need as much, especially one-on-one attention from both parents all the time when they're young. But then they grow up and they start getting real complicated, and they start having, needs in terms of being taught how to live life and to really have their characters be formed. And that's where they were getting to. And I was like, usually at that point of life is when providers in families start working, really ramping up their careers, in their 30s and 40s. And I started realizing, this is completely backwards from what it should be. You should work really hard while your kids are growing up. And when they get to this point, then you should retire, right? When you can spend time with them as they're in this moment that they need the most, one-on-one time with you to do things together in life. And then they grow up, then they leave. And that's, once your kids leave, that's when you should unretire and go back to work and throw yourself in working 80-hour to 100-hour weeks again, maybe when you're in your 50s or something like that. So it made me realize if there's any time to really try to seek a retirement, it'd be right now in my life when my kids are getting to that point where I can do things with them and they're starting to be capable. And so that's when I realized, I don't even want to have to do a weekly meeting with companies or real estate investments and things like that. I want to retire right now, and so I don't have to do anything, so that I can focus this period of my life on really focusing on my children and building something with them that we could be proud about. And so that's when I started realizing, let's do that. Let's try to start figuring that out as a family. And so the way that I made that happen was I started realizing, these assets that I built up, they could be sold for quite a bit of money. And that's what the decision I decided to do, to really be able to fully retire, maybe indefinitely, but at least for the next big number of years as my kids are growing up and becoming capable. And so that's what I did, is I talked about it with my business partners and things like that, and started selling some of these assets to them and generating larger clumps of cash in which we'd be able to then use that to do meaningful things. And the first things that we started doing, me and my boys, the ones that were older, and even the older girls and my wife as well, we started traveling a lot. Not again in search of pleasure resorts and things like that, but in search of experiences, things that we could go do together. You probably noticed that when you pass through important experiences with other people, those are the kinds of moments that really can form a relationship and some powerful bonds with people. So we started traveling more, started hiking, started climbing mountains, hiking mountains with my sons. And then we set our sights on spending an entire summer abroad and saying, how could we do this, again, in the way that ate up as little resources as possible? So we planned it so that we would go and live somewhere in northern Spain that wasn't incredibly expensive, but was this magical place in the world. And then we would rent out our house at home. And in essence, we'd kind of still be living the same life, eating up about the same amount of resources, whether we were in Spain or not. Of course, there's the flights and stuff to take care of. We started trying to get smart about how we could travel and kind of live in a retirement, be doing something meaningful as a family, but eating up as little resources as we could. So it was a skill we had to develop. Something like travel, especially travel with children, it's a skill, and you got to practice it, and then you get good at it. And it's also a skill to be able to travel while consuming, the least amount of resources. Again, by doing something like renting out your house, which can then pay your mortgage payment and things like that while you're gone. So the next thing that made sense for us to do as a family from that, again, I'd cashed out a bunch of resources and had the cash sitting there that we could live off of for a while. And so we decided that we didn't know yet what was the most meaningful thing we could do as a family yet. And so we decided to have a little bit of a Bilbo Baggins moment and kind of let the wizard in us come and kick us out the door and have to go on a journey to figure out what to do next as a family, knowing only that in the process, we were bound to encounter some wonderful things. And so that's exactly what happened. After we had done that summer in Spain for a time, we decided, well, why don't we try to pull this off for an entire year? And just as with all these other things that I've done, that took over 6 months of planning to make happen, where that was the goal. And so we set our sights on that, and we give ourselves a deadline. And at some point you throw it's like that story of like two kids in an Irish countryside that came upon a wall that they thought they'd never be able to climb. And so one of the kids took the cap from one of them and throws it over the wall, so then they'd be forced to figure out how to climb it and retrieve it. That's the kind of thing you can do sometimes with things like that. We bought the tickets, 6 months ahead of time to force ourselves into it, and then figured out the rest of it. And I think that's another thing you have to do sometimes with these kind of things. But we were able to do it. We had built up the skills then to know how to travel with 8 children at a time, which I could give stories, but that'd make this far too long. But we built up the skills and had the ups and downs of travel to teach us how to do this. So we were able to, then get on this journey of a year of nonstop travel. And again, we knew to give it some framework of meaning to what we were doing. And so we made this a year of travel where we were going to visit the lands of our ancestors, and in a sense, try to discover kind of what we were made of, if you will, try to discover our origins. And so we spent we spent mostly in Europe, because that's where a big concentration of our ancestors are. I have ancestry in Guatemala, I have ancestry in Asia as well, but we focused it mainly on the European ancestry for this. And again, we did it. We launched ourselves out the door, and I'll kind of spare the details that we can talk about some other time in that whole process. Maybe you can give me some of the kinds of things you would like to hear about in the future about that. We actually videoed the whole thing and have released very little of it. So it's still our ambition to make a series of videos talking about that whole experience. But I won't go into it here for the sake of time. Instead, I'll just kind of let you know how that led to now where we are right now on this farmstead. And as we went to these lands of our ancestors, and as we took a look around at the world and just tried to fully immerse ourselves in the environments that we were in, we started noticing a pattern. And that was that we felt the best. We felt the most alive in the parts of the world that retained the most magic to them, I'm going to say, enchantment. And for those of you that I know are in Europe, especially, well, really almost anywhere in Europe, but we spent a lot of time in the UK. And of course, the UK has a number of those places that retain their enchantment from the past. Northern Spain, in the Asturias region where we were, is literally a fairy tale landscape in the way that it has both these green lush coasts and snowy peaks all with right by each other, and turquoise waters, and then these stone structures and churches and things that again are straight out of something like Lord of the Rings. I realized, like there are parts of the world like that, and that's where our ancestors mostly used to live in. And then there's other parts of the world, when you're in an urban environment, in a concrete landscape, anything really built after about World War II is not enchanting at all, we noticed. And the world had become kind of unenchanted about that time, although it had been building up to that for some quite amount of that time. We spent a lot of time in rural country environments, one of our favorite places being a lamb farm or a sheep farm in the Lake District in the UK, and it was right at lambing season. And so we were there right as, there were a dozen or 20 lambs being born every day, and our kids were able to just jump in and help the farmers and the shepherds that were working, and they made some great relationships with them. And so now you can see why we're into sheep now. It was because of that. But the main pattern that I'm trying to build is that we realized that those were the places where we felt most alive, in those enchanted places of the world, and that the world could still be like that. I think most of us live our lives in these concrete landscapes, in places of strip malls, and these places that bear, oftentimes wearing clothes that bear no more, have lost their enchantment and their magic to them. And we realized it's not just in Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter that this enchantment exists. It doesn't have to be just in movies. The world really was like this in a lot of ways. So we came home knowing that if we did anything new in life, we wanted to try to live in a place that still bore some enchantment, and that we could work to try to re-enchant in the ways that we could, and invite others to do the same. It kind of became an obvious course of life of what we needed to do next. So I actually ended up selling all those regenerative assets I'd built up, because it became obvious that that's not the life we wanted to live anymore. Just a comfortable life in the setting that we did, in just a suburban landscape at the back of a cul-de-sac on a quarter-acre lot in a non-enchanted house, just kind of living a mundane life. Even if we could do it with the retirement, how much better would it be to, again, set ourselves at a new highest ideal, which would be to live in a tremendously beautiful place. And on that beautiful place, try to cultivate not just these kind of resources like I did in the past that make money, because again, money is just a tool. It's something that's so fleeting and insignificant. But how about if we tried to build these regenerative kind of processes that were, enchanted regenerative processes? And what I mean by that is the processes of life. Build a posterity with our family, build regenerative processes in the landscape, because the living world, nature has these all over the place, in which you create resources such as food in a way that actually regenerates the landscape, makes the soil better by generating food, rather than like most of the world in the way that we've done it through extraction, through using petroleum essentially to grow meat, and then creating all sorts of bad byproducts that only make the world worse. And slowly, little by little, the world becomes uglier because of that process. How about trying to build new regenerative processes that they're not new, they're very old, they've always existed, but tapping into those and trying to build those living regenerative processes, getting away from the money like we have in the past, and essentially, doing what we could in our little pocket of the world to show others that the world could be enchanted once again. Like anything you've seen in Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, that you thought, oh, wouldn't that be awesome if the world was like that? I've seen the places. It can be like that. And if you've been to the right places, again, the Highlands of Scotland or the Asturias region of Spain, you'll learn that the world is, dare I say, full of spirits and magical things and demons. And there's still people that, if you live in those settings, you'll know what I mean. Those things are still very much alive. It's not this flat world that we've come to accept. There's a world that is rich in spirits and sprites and demons. And again, to some of you, this is going to sound like I'm just spouting like a madman now, but if you listen to me enough, maybe you'll come to learn what I actually mean by that, and how our ancestors used to live in those settings, and why inevitably in those kinds of settings they had these rich worlds filled with gods and spirits and demons and all those things in this much more enchanted, magical way of life. Even to hear myself say that, I know there's going to be some people who will be like, what is this guy talking about? But there'll be other of you that can maybe say, I think I get what he might be leaning about. So we got home, and knowing that was our goal, we started just trying to see how could we live that out. And COVID hit, and the world starts fracturing even more than it had been, obviously, because it had been fracturing way more than that. And I was sitting home during one of these lockdowns and realized that I was bored, and so I got a couple of my daughters and planned out a little course and said, let's go drive in search of the kind of place that we're looking for. And make a long story short, through that course of searching and driving around during the COVID lockdowns, we came across this valley, and just felt when we saw these mountains and we saw the valley that you could live in underneath these mountains, we saw some of that enchantment that we were looking for. And I see Wis Tsukaza has said, right, you could say enchantment or beauty. And that's a good way to put it for anybody that is a little bit turned off by the spirits and the demons talk, is to see that by enchantment, another way of perceiving it is a world that where you cultivate beauty in ever greater ways. Well, and beauty and meaning, I could say, they go hand in hand. In fact, those two things, they're kind of inextricable concepts. So anyway, that leads us to here. I think this is probably a good stopping point. In so many of these things that I've talked about, what's tough for me on this is that on any of these elements, you could open them up and talk, half an hour just on any of these elements, but I know that would be unwise to do any of that now. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to take a look at the chat, look at some of your questions and things that you've had. You can kind of lay some out there. I'll get down to everybody's, and we'll just kind of interact for a little bit here at the end. And so when I kind of re-edit this video, I'll probably end it about now and cut the rest of this stuff all off. So I guess I should give a formal, thanks for watching this presentation. And if you liked it, I hope you'll come around for more. I'm going to be doing, at least for the next 90 days, a lot of these live types of presentations. And I'm always inclined to apologize because I know that being able to do this live and be articulate and get rid of the tics and the ums and the things like that, and actually be engaging, that's something I have to grow in. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing this, is because with each one, hopefully I get better at being articulate, engaging with you. And I don't know any other way to do it than to just click that live button and make it happen and force myself to develop those skills. So if it seems a bit rough, hey, I agree with you, and my commitment is to improve over time. I think that's important to say, that hopefully I can, progress in these skills and this ability to present, plus the technology itself. There's so much that can be done. If you've looked at the gaming streams, oh my goodness, there's so many things that can be done as far as dressing this up with all sorts of images and adding videos and sound effects and all those things. Of course, there's a lot of that I wouldn't do, but there's a lot of things I could do to enhance these presentations, and I've still just got to figure that out. So thank you for joining us on this, and I hope you'll come back next time. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to take a look here. Anybody wants to take a break for a minute or so, I'm just going to read these comments and see if there's any good questions and things like that I can address right now to kind of just keep this conversation going. So again, thank you for those that are actively participating. That's another part of this live video that is exactly why I'm doing it, because I want to actually get feedback, to interact with you. I hope we can figure out other ways of doing this, because of course chat, it's pretty limited. I would love to see your faces, hear your voices, but we'll have to settle on this for just right now. So let me look back a little bit here. So let's hit real quick. Christian asked, there's plenty of other kinds of businesses that lend themselves to this, or I said that. Are there any that come off the top of my head? Well, for sure the internet, is a limitless landscape for this kind of things. And that's what, for example, if you read the 4-Hour Workweek, he really focuses on is, why don't you build up some revenue source that will allow you to mini retire for a time. And so that's one avenue to take it. you build up you make a really great sort of e-course or something on a subject, and you build up an audience that you can sell that e-course to, and maybe it takes you a year to build up this audience. You make this e-course, you then channel people to that to generate some revenue off of it, and it does for a time, and you could kind of retire for a time living off of that. That's just an example. Of course, there's many other things, but that's the kind of thing you could do that, at least in the short run, will do that. So the internet's an endless landscape. Let me think if there's other ones that I have thought of. I mean, really, there's so many things. Like, take even a restaurant. If you did have, maybe you had resources or connections, people close to you that had that kind of experience. Well, if you built a restaurant for 8 years, like I, using the principles that I've showed you, a restaurant could work, because if you build it around the processes, where it's not crucial that you are there, that you are the personality of the restaurant, but you make the restaurant its own living being, essentially. And that's the way to look at these kind of things. You're crafting a living, being that you are not it. You are not the soul of it. Then something like a restaurant, you could generate the processes too. So that's where there's both opportunities in the new space of something like the internet, where in the internet is so nice because you can scale things tremendously, right? There's no limit to how many people you can reach or can, over and over buy something that you create. But then back in the concrete world, there's just as much opportunities. And I would think of businesses that have been around forever, like a restaurant, there's different other businesses in real estate that you could focus on. And that's one nice thing about real estate, is that real estate, you can actually kind of have different businesses to how the economic cycle is going that can hit different things. But anyway, look for those tried and true businesses out in the real world that have been around forever. And then you realize you make it your goal to just do that business well, with processes and things in a way that don't require you, and you build that over time. So yeah, I guess that's what I have to say about that. All right, thank you, Sebastian, for your compliments. I don't know if I think I've seen your name before, but either way, welcome, and I hope to see you keep on coming back. Sebastian asked about manhood. So just in case there's anybody on here that hasn't heard, I am doing an ongoing manhood series. I'm not sure when it will end, but we've got 2 videos into it. And by the way, tomorrow, I should have said this before, but tomorrow I'm going to resume that. And the one that I'm going to do tomorrow is that over the weekend, I was reading Jordan Peterson's new book, and actually his first chapter has some great principles in that first chapter that we can add to what we'd already built up thus far, kind of that image of the valley, and kind of better that hypothetical of the valley, combine it with his ideas to really hit home what manhood is in a way that I think will really leave you just concrete, knowing, I can see why this thing came about in every single society that's existed. It will finally make that hit home exactly why that has occurred. And it works just the same for marriage too, which is maybe another series that I'm going to do, is understanding what is marriage. Why has it also existed in virtually every society that's ever that we have record of? I'll also, one more thing on that, the number one request I get is to make more of the essays tied to movies. So just know I am working on that, and I want to honor that, because again, I enjoy it too. It's always just a matter of buckling down and getting that stuff done, writing the essay, getting it recorded, and it's the editing that kills me. I'm trying to get my kids in to help me with the editing, because they're getting to that age that they could really help out. Okay, it looks like Christian, you told Sebastian about the series. Okay, so Quick Strides asks, so you're going to jump back in when you are empty nesters. And so, yeah, as far as what we're doing now, the way that I look at retirement now, in some sense, we've jumped back into working in a way that's not quite retirement. But what I'm looking to do now is to build these regenerative cycles, but do it with my children, alongside my children. That's something we've completely broken in the modern world, right? Is that we go off to work, the breadwinners go off to work and work in these jobs that their children don't even understand, and you're separated most of the day. And meantime, your children go into this simulated environment in school where you learn good things, but you don't actually get to interact with the real world for decades, until you're actually let into the real world. So my thought was, let's jump back out of retirement, if you will, because we have basically, in getting into Mission Top and doing other things, we have basically forced ourselves that at least in the next couple of years, we have to generate back some, we're starting to grow a lot of our food, so that's going to lower a lot of our expenses, but we will need to actually generate money once again eventually. So I need to work, you could say, in the traditional kind of work. And lo and behold, that's one of the reasons I'm jumping in and dedicating myself to this, because this is what I hope can be that work over time. And in doing that, I'm also enlisting, again, my children to jump in and do this work with me. Let's do this work alongside each other. Let's create Mission Top, and let's do this other kind of work based in this video world and world of technology, in which we're doing all these things alongside each other. We're building it together. We're crafting our relationships together while we're crafting these living, breathing assets as well. And so, again, I got a little convoluted there, but I think you can tell what kind of my aims are with this now, that this is our new focus. And so we're having to now put in that work to generate these regenerative assets again, but they're of a completely different nature than the ones that I was doing before. I think they're more meaningful ones, and ones that our family, they're so wonderful because as we're doing them, multiple things happen simultaneously. They get practical skills as they're doing them. Again, they're out of the regular school system doing things like this, and engaging with the world. At the same time, we're cultivating our relationship. At the same time, we are cultivating assets, whether it's in food and things on the farmstead, or what we're doing with videos. We do hope to ultimately turn this into revenue streams. Although I'll say, there's so many ways that I just could never do revenue streams online, especially anything that put me kind of as subservient to masters such as advertising. If I get into advertising other people's products, then they become my new master. If I do anything, it's going to be tied to just a direct relationship with you, something more of a Patreon model kind of thing, where there's something to that effect. Again, I'm not even worried about that as being the primary thing right now, but that's what I would search, because then it's at least, this one-on-one relationship where, with you as the masters, you could say, rather than some other intermediary company or something like that being the masters. Okay, let me work down here. Like that quote, Christian, that he did. Wiss talks about the traveling videos. That's another one I'm trying to enlist the kids in, because we even did all these trips before we ever did a summer in Spain. Before we traveled for a year, we did a number of these trips with my kids, and we filmed them. And we have some great footage. And what I'd love to do now is bring them in, and we kind of have them talk about, because a number of them are 2 or 3 years ago, have them talk about those experiences now, and then try to run some footage over it. That's kind of what we were thinking about. So yes, Christian, marriage, that is something that I very much left out of this, but something very much that I want to bring into this whole thing. And in fact, my wife has agreed that at some point here, we're going to bring her in and do some of these live streams together, where I think we can get into a lot of that. All right, Sebastian brought up about Gladiator and this live stream's message. Yeah, applying to that. Yeah, that's a little more difficult because, of course, Gladiator focuses so much on those kind of martial, military elements of manhood. Uh, but I will say on the Joseph of Egypt kind of part of it, I mean, that is something where you can see in all of this, once you start developing the ability to generate resources, I guess you could say, or especially these regenerative resources, you realize that no matter what happens to you in any circumstance, so yeah, even if you get thrust down into a pit at some point in life, because inevitably those kinds of things happen to people through health problems, through natural disasters. I'm very much believe in stoicism and those kind of things, that every night I have to imagine, my children could die in their sleep tonight. These things do happen and you have to be ready for them. But no matter what happens, if you've practiced these kinds of skills of being able to develop, create these types of regenerative principles wherever you are, then yeah, you're like Joseph of Egypt, and no matter what happens, you can't be held down. You grow out of them. So that would be one of those things. And then you can see with Gladiator, kind of what's behind his character in the character of Gladiator, the way that he gives proper, he has a base, a foundation to him, which makes all the other stuff make sense in the way that he gives the proper respect to his ancestors and the gods. He has that proper focus of being a man in the sense that he just wants to get back and take care of his family and focus on the harvest, again, the regenerative things of his basic life. He doesn't want to be the general out there and whatnot. So that's part of Gladiator that I think applies too. But I have to think about that a little bit more. Okay, so Wiss asked, do you have any more assets to cash out and install you guys there? So at this point, we basically cashed out pretty much all that we can, and kind of tried to give ourselves a runway into the future. And a lot of our resources we had to put into this property itself when we bought it. So we had to both I would have loved to have been able to get this whole thing without a mortgage. And in fact, that was our original plan when we came to this valley. But then the last property we looked at was this one. And we were looking to spend about half the amount that we ultimately ended up spending. But we got here and it was in two parcels, two sections. And we were just looking at one, but we got here and the previous owner was like, hey, aren't you going to see the house too? Because we were just looking at land, and it was just the pasture. It was just the pasture, basically, with a little bit of the ravine, for those of you that have seen the property. And we said, the house, that's for sale too? And he said, oh yeah, come on in, you got to see it. Like, you really, in fact, the house and the surrounding trees and forests and stuff, that's the best part of this place anyway. So we got here, and suddenly we realized, like, this was an opportunity to get both a pasture kind of place where we could do a lot of the cultivation of our own resources that we wanted to do, but then this was by far the most beautiful place we'd been to here, and already everywhere being beautiful. And so we said, okay, it's one of those moments that maybe we're going to have to be like those Irish boys and throw our cap over the wall and do something we don't want to, which is get ourselves into a mortgage again, but then give ourselves a runway in which to build up the resources, the regenerative resources that we want to into the future again. And that sounded fun. See, that's the thing, is that you have the freedom to say, if you do have, if you get yourself into a position of having retired and knowing you could live forever just like that, well, then you have the freedom to then say, well, if we want to, we can get ourselves out of this retirement in a way that's going to force us to learn and grow and work hard again. But that's actually, that's when we're going to get more into this meta game. That's really what it comes down to, folks, is building the right things to shoot for. And heaven in life is not a place, it's a process, right? It's a process of progressing towards an ideal. And as you're progressing, as you're making that progress, that's when you are experiencing heaven. It's a state of being. That's when we feel the most fulfilled, when we're making progress towards something meaningful. So when we found this place, and even though it was going to stretch us, we said, that's going to be worth it. And it's going to require us to, have to create new things, jump back in and work hard. But hey, we can do it together. And so that was the whole idea behind it. Christa says, I think Mount Carmel or Mount Carmel is enchanted. I've heard it tried both. I'm wondering if you're referring to the one in Utah or the one in Israel. But I think both you could say. Startups do well. Okay. So Quickstride says, I know e-commerce startups do well. Yeah, like we said, there's so many opportunities on the internet. Although the internet's a hard one because there's, of course, so many people are telling you, oh, you can do it easily. And that I wouldn't believe is that you can just, magically make money on the internet. It never works that way. You're probably going to have to put in a lot of time and some good hard work in order to build up these kind of regenerative assets on there. Christian, thank you. You said I've already improved. I'm trying to. Again, try to get rid of these tics. It's embarrassing to watch these, by the way, to watch myself do these. Okay, so Wiss asks, how are we surviving at the moment? So what we did is we cashed out all these things, but we made sure not to throw all our cash and use it all up, like by putting it into this property. So we put a lot into here, and that's actually kind of good, is that, worst comes to worst, we could sell this place and we would have then assets again if we needed to. That would be, plan not A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but, way down at the end of the alphabet of things we'd have to do. So we did lock up a bunch into this property, but we made sure to leave enough that we'd have a runway of at least a couple years into something else. And so that's kind of our plan, is that we start generating various streams of resources. So one is just food for ourselves. That's good. But we think with these 80 acres, we can generate enough food for ourselves to satisfy most of our food needs, while at the same time making a surplus that we can eventually start selling things. And I get my kids doing little enterprises, whether it's meat, whether Thomas is about to do a bakery, whether it's produce and things like that, that then they can start contributing to the family's income and also doing things that they want to do. For example, again, in our church, it is important for the people that want to, especially there's a duty for the males to go on a mission. The women can if they want to. And so if they wanted to do that, I would want them to, it costs money to do that. You have to pay it to go on a mission, funny enough. So those kind of things could help them to raise the money too. But anyway, we get those kind of enterprises going at the same time that we try to have our fingers in a few different things, such as being here into making videos and making content that hopefully at some point will be we find some way, in a way that I feel good about, turning into a revenue stream as well. And so we have a runway to that, and the more we can start making money or generating assets, the less we're eating from the money that we've saved up, so that over time, as we start making more money, it will lengthen the runway, I guess you could say, into what we're trying to do. Okay, have I seen the movie Hostiles from Martin Kuchen or Kuchen? I wish I knew how to pronounce names. I haven't, but I will check that out. Quick Strides mentions lawn care. That's starting up something like that. Lawn care, that's, again, one of those tried and true businesses that's never going to go away, right? People are always going to need that kind of property care. So it's another one of those that, in fact, my business partner, his son, started up a lawn care business that then, he used the relationships he had, and he became our company's primary source to do lawn care for our properties. and built himself up a nice little business. But you can make that as big as you want to. So it's always going to be out there. Probably a lot of competition, since it is such a business that a lot of people see as a startup business, but doable nonetheless. See, I haven't seen the Hacksmith. Another thing I'll have to check out. All right, thank you, Sebastian. So yes, Wiss, as he says, it would be great to have my wife on here. I agree. And she's agreed to do it. It's all just a matter of when, so we can start talking about these other aspects. Like, a lot of people, of course, they say 8 kids, wow, that, first of all, that's kind of eye-opening. Probably makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable, just the way that we've been taught by the world to think about kids. But it's another one of those things where I say, like, who told you that if you have an uncomfortable feeling about 8 kids, I just ask you to say, who taught you that? How did you learn to feel uncomfortable about 8 kids? Is that you speaking, or is that ideas speaking through you? And just a simple principle. Well, just to lay it out there, everything, so many bad things come from people on this earth, but so many good things, all the best things come from people as well. And so it's all a matter of who these kids will turn out to be, right? And that's where being a parent takes a terrible risk. You do have to have a little bit of an arrogance of saying, I think I could produce kids that would actually make things better out there in the world. And if you can have that kind of arrogance, well, then you can have 8 kids and feel proud about it, I guess you could say. But if a lot of people don't have that kind of confidence anymore, but the reason they have that lack of confidence about having kids, or that things could actually go well in the world with having kids, is, I think, in large part because of ideas that have been thrust upon them, and oftentimes not so much because of things that people have been able to confirm for themselves, if that makes any sense. So permaculture, Sebastian asked about permaculture. Yes, definitely, that's one of the principles we're trying to pursue. I mean, I think in what we're trying to do, we're trying to cover, there's so many kind of hot words out there right now, because what we're doing is something that's very much a part of a movement right now. And we're trying to both be part of that movement, but not be caught up so much in a movement where oftentimes these things can turn into almost religions, right? Where somebody goes down a road and says, like, okay, I'm doing permaculture. And then there kind of a dogma forms about what that means and what it doesn't mean. And people that are doing it are good, and people that aren't are bad. And so we're trying to learn as much as we can from all these different kind of approaches, whether it's permaculture design, or regenerative agriculture is another hot word, or I don't know, they escape me, but there's a bunch of them. And we have like 50 books sitting on our mantle that have so many of these different approaches. We're trying to learn everything we can, and as I usually do, try to pull out all the best principles of all of them and try to find the best kind of meta approach, and then go out there and actually, through experience, learn what the best approach is. So permaculture is definitely something that we're studying and learning about, but it's not something that we're like locking ourselves into as far as just a single concept. Okay, so Quickstride. So here's the thing, Quickstride. I know that you're one of my relatives because of what you said, but I'm actually not sure who you are. So so help me to know that, because I know I've learned enough of that, but I should have asked this by now, but I'm not sure which particular of my relatives you are from what you said. So I know I'm going to feel so dumb when you say, is it Chris? Is that who it is? Now that you say, 6 kids. So anyway, for those of you watching, one of the people who watches a lot of my videos and comments, I've known is one of my relatives, but I haven't actually been able to figure out who it is. Oh yeah, it is Chris. Okay, so thanks for watching, Chris. Okay, and Christian has 2 kids, and I think anybody who's willing to have kids is, to be praised and encouraged. So well done, Christian. And well done, Chris, for having 6 kids. Okay, I think I've reached the bottom there. I answered some questions. Here we are, above 2 hours. And thank you again, everyone, for being on here. Again, I'm very much looking forward to these streams where we'll be able to both, I'll present something, but also interact with you, try to improve over time, try to find better ways for you guys to interact, because chat's nice, but it could be, obviously there are better ways and whatnot. So thank you for being here, and I'm gonna sign off. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow. Again, applying manhood, the things we've covered so far, to some Jordan Peterson principles. So see you tomorrow.